So, the parsha for this Shabbat, it's a little controversial. There's a lot of fighting that's going on, and it reminds me, every year it reminds me, and every other year I tell the same story. But every year it reminds me of this particular story, and it's the story about a young rabbi who goes to this community, a new community. It's the very first position. And on the very first Shabbat that he's there, the Torah reading happened to include the reading of the Ten Commandments. And in Jewish tradition, when it's the reading of the Ten Commandments, everybody stands up. It's almost as if we're all standing there all over again. Every time the Ten Commandments are read, the congregation stands. That's a common tradition. But in this place, it was a little bit more confusing because he thought that everybody's going to stand, and soon he saw that half the congregation did stand up, and the other half remained seated. And as soon as he saw this happening, there started to be this argument during services that was breaking out in front of this new rabbi who was just ordained, just got smicha. You can imagine the schwitz is starting to stir, right? If you're not sure what that is, ask a neighbor. And so he started to sweat. He started to get nervous. And the congregation was forgetting all about the Ten Commandments, something that's supposed to be relatively important. And they just started bickering and arguing, and it got heated and heated and heated. And the rabbi's looking at the chazan, at the cantor, and he says, "What's going on here? And you have to explain this to me. Why is everybody fighting? What is the custom in this community?" And the chazan says, "I have no idea." So the chazan, who's been there for years and sees this all the time, chazan goes to the gabbai. The gabbai is somebody who helps with the Torah service, and the rabbi is going to the gabbai and says, "What's the custom here?" He says, "I have no idea." So then Mr. Gradstein is in Fraser Meadows, down the way, right? And is long since retired and is one of the founders of the congregation. And the rabbi goes and says, "You have to tell me that I'm seeing something really strange. I just got here. I don't know the customs. And I see that when it's time for the Ten Commandments, half the congregation was standing, the other half of the congregation was sitting. And then during the reading of the Torah, everybody was arguing, and the man stands up and was really enthusiastic, and he said, 'That's our tradition, the arguing.'" I thought it was funny. Okay. There's a level of truth in this story, though. There's something, I think, that's significant that we get to see, that we get to fight and argue and still make Shabbos together. But we've often shared that's becoming less and less and less possible. We have a hard time being in the same room with people who are a little bit different or have different ideas or want to have a different priority or a different concern. And we've shared some of these texts in our different Torah study groups along the way the last couple of years. And I think it relates really well to our Torah portion this Shabbat. It says in the Mishnah, it says that every argument that's for the sake of heaven, which is kind of good for God, for the sake of heaven, that's the words the rabbis use. Every argument for the sake of heaven will in the end be of lasting value. Every argument will be of lasting value, but every argument not for the sake of heaven, it won't endure. It's going to be like dust. What's an argument for the sake of heaven, they ask in the Mishnah? Well, one answer is it's the argument between Hillel and Shammai. We'll talk about them in a second. So in addition to Hillel and Shammai, they ask what's an argument that's not for the sake of heaven? The argument of Korach and his company and his fellows. So this Torah portion is about Korach. This Torah portion in the cycle of all of our readings is about this guy who's a cousin of Moses, who is totally challenging Moses' authority. And he basically says, "Who made you the leader over us?" It was God, by the way. But the first message, the first thing you see, it's like, well, this guy's arguing for democracy. Who made you the leader over us? Why do you have more responsibility and respect than me and my family, cousin, right? A real challenging of leadership here. So now sometimes we can say, challenging leaders isn't a bad thing. Challenging leaders can be a really good thing. Challenging anybody could be a good thing. Remember, I said in the very beginning from the Mishnah, an argument that's for the sake of heaven, that is worthy of God's blessing, if you will, It's going to endure. The argument is going to endure. That doesn't mean they're going to fight for years. But there's something in an argument that has value. And we tend to see people just launch and fire and not care who they take down in the midst of a disagreement. So let's look at this better type of argument, the one between Hillel and Shammai. Now, Hillel and Shammai are the precursors to the rabbis. They are incredible scholars, both of them, and they debate constantly in the Mishnah. And out of 1,000 times, Shammai wins the argument like twice, and the rest is all Hillel, which is why everybody knows Hillel's name, right? Hillel is this incredible sage, but Shammai is always recorded. His message is always there. What was going on for Korach in the Torah, reading this particular Shabbat? Korach says, I want to make an argument, and I'm going to take you down. And that's pretty much all that it says. It's just a challenging of authority, of leadership, without anything meaningful that's going to be there as an alternative. And God picked Moses, but let's leave that aside. If you go deeper, the Mishnah is going to say that Hillel and Shammai are worthy, their arguments are worthy because they listen to each other. They respect each other. Shammai always loses, almost always, and yet they are recorded together because the rabbis of old saw the power of a dissenting opinion always being included because times are going to change and perspectives are going to change and we are going to change and ideas are going to continue to evolve as we understand what God might want from us. It's not always going to be the same. And so Hillel and Shammai, they're always recorded together without exception. It's incredible. And a lot of people, when they argue, they say, oh, it's going to be like Hatfields and McCoys, right? It's almost like a family feud. Well, it wasn't true for them. Even on essential questions, whether it was about ritual purity, things that might not matter so much for us, but in the Mishnah, these were really important topics, including issues about who can be married to one another. And there was disagreements, and yet it says very clearly that the schools, the disciples of both Hillel and the disciples of Shammai, their descendants would marry each other. Now for us, we'd be like, okay, big deal. But a deeper look at that is there was an emphasis on unity in the Jewish community, an emphasis on unity, not uniformity, not you have to do it my way, but a sense of being all together. That was something that was powerful for them and powerful for us as we look at them all through these thousands of years. 2,000 years we're reading about their arguments. Korach, on the other hand, in the Torah portion, his motivation from almost all of the rabbis' perspective, some are going to give him benefit of the doubt, but they're wrong. Almost everybody is going to look at Korach's motivation as nothing but to undermine Moses, undermine Moses' position. It was out of envy and contentiousness and ambition for victory. Hillel and Shammai made the arguments in order to find truth. Korach made the argument in order to get power. That's the difference. So what is going to endure? The arguments for the sake of heaven are going to endure when they're going to uncover and reveal truths. And in our most controversial issues, even of today, we can look at opposite poles and say how one side is just awful and the other side is even worse. And yet, there's going to be some aspects of truth that would be relevant for us to consider from a Jewish point of view. Those truths are human dignity and also security. Both are truths. And sometimes in the Jewish community, they seem to compete with one another. Well, what is going to be more true? You can talk about Israel. What is going to be the ultimate truths? There were some who want to defend issues of justice. Well, I find that to be true, and they're kind of like our Nevi'im, the prophets. And there are others who want to be kind of the guardians and protectors and a little concerned about security. Well, we need Shomrim too. We need both. It's not always one or the other. It's usually one and the other. And where do we put our emphasis? How does Jewish tradition reconcile challenging scenarios? But here's the thing for me. The primary difference between Korach on one hand, Hillel and Shammai on the other, is that Korach was motivated by his personal ambition, and Hillel and Shammai were motivated by a desire to find the truth. It was to uncover something that might be hidden. In fact, one of God's names in our tradition is Emet, truth. Emet, the first letter of the alphabet, Aleph, Tav, the last letter of the alphabet, and guess where the M sound, the Mem sound falls in terms of the alphabet? All inclusive, Emet. That's what Hillel and Shammai are trying to peel away. So I want to share for this Shabbat when everybody's kind of in their corners. And in the midst of being in our corners, we also have the value of being pursuers of justice. There's no getting out of that. And I'm being very careful and deliberate with my words. To be a rodef, right? It says, tzedek, tzedek, tirdof. Justice, justice, you must pursue, you shall chase after. It doesn't say wish upon the star. It says you have to go after it. So we be pursuers of justice, and then we get to figure out what's important to one another. Next, we're putting together our adult learning program for next year. And one of the things I'm going to be teaching about in a smaller course, maybe a five-week course, is the idea in Jewish tradition of machloket. A machloket is the rabbinic term for a difference of opinions. Because the rabbis are going to talk about how these and those are the words of the living God. If both are true and it seems to be so different, well, how do we reconcile? Well, then we have to get into it. But when we do, I'm going to recognize that you are created in God's image. And I'm also usually acting as if I'm created in God's image. Usually, often, I try. And if that is true, then the conversations have to change. They have to change inside the synagogue. They have to change differently around the Torah study table. And when we're in classes, when we're in the lobby, when I'm not around, the conversations have to change. And if the conversations have to change, all the more so after I preach on something that you don't like, then let's talk about it. Let's figure out where there's truths among all of us so that there is a sense of unity, not uniformity, a sense of cohesion and of godliness that's going to go all throughout this congregation, this community, the Jewish people, the United States of America, and the world. I expect nothing less from us. It's true. I expect nothing less of us than to do our best to walk in that way. Ken Yeritzel.